Okay, welcome to tonight's Great Decisions with Dr. Pablo Toral from Beloit College. Tonight we're talking about green energy competition. I would like to thank the sponsors of our program tonight, the Franklin Public Library Foundation, with financial support from the Jerome J. and Dorothy H. Holtz Family Foundation, and Carol and Tom Donovan. So our speaker tonight is Dr. Pablo Toral. I think he's familiar to many of you. He's spoken, I think this is his 6th or 7th.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, Great Decisions program here at Franklin Public Library. He is a Ph.D. He is a professor of environmental studies and international relations at Beloit College. His research interests are sustainable development. His teaching interests are international political economy, environmental law and policy, sustainability, and city planning. He's currently working on 2 book projects, the Routledge Handbook of International Political Economy of Latin America and Disdevelopment in Latin America. So I'm going to turn it over to Pablo.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, this one works.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. So, does this work for the people watching online as well? Okay. All right, I can hear myself really well. Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to come back. I see some familiar faces in the room. I'm just not going to speak very fast or very loud, because I think we're adjusting the volume. Oh, no, I'm gone. Okay. So, is that better?
No, it's too low.
Too low. Okay, so I think it's too low now. So, well, thank you for inviting me. That's better. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to come back. Yes, I think it's the 6th or the 7th, but I think this is the first time I don't see snow between Beloit or here. There's always been, if not everywhere, but some, so it's an early spring. So thank you for coming out, and I look forward to the conversation. So I'm going to move on to the slide where I provide my strategy. So this is the different sections that I will be addressing today. First of all, I'm going to welcome people, and I will be talking a little bit about the arguments from the essay that is available in this year's booklet, because I know that some people like to read it, so I'm going to highlight what I think are some main points, at least some that are important to me. I always like to then take it a little further. So if I had written this piece, I would have, considered this as well. I will then talk about, in that section, what else would I have added. I think I would add a little bit more about some additional sources of energy that the author doesn't cover. I don't think there's anything wrong with his approach to focus on 2, and there's reasons why he did it. But I normally like to point out other frontiers of technology, and I'll be doing that today as well. One of the goals of the presentation is to do justice to the main claim in the article that for us to develop green technology, we need to have the right kinds of trade regimes or trade laws, because one of the problems that we have is that there's no one single country that owns the best technology for all of the sources of energy. So if we have trade and we can take the best from each place, we can actually have the best technology. But if we don't have the right trade regime that will facilitate that, we're probably not going to have the best possible scenario that the technology would allow. So in this case, to maximize how much green energy we can harvest, we need to have the right trade so that we can access the technology wherever it is. And I think that's one of the key points that I will be emphasizing in the presentation at the end. So another point that I will talk about is how the development of green energy can impact global geopolitics, which is also another aspect of the book, the chapter in the book, which is the tension that is caught in their discussion. If we had an open trade regime, we'd have access to the best technology in the world. But maybe we don't want to buy the technology that's the best in the world from some countries, because then we're giving them too many resources. So this is the big challenge. If we really want to have the best, cheapest, we have to buy it from neighbors we don't like. So that is the big dilemma that we have, and that's one of the points that I will emphasize in the conclusions. So with that, let's dive right in. So a couple of thoughts on, or a little bit of background on the scholar that we are basing our discussion on. Bud Ward is a very well-known journalist. His career is in journalism. It's been in many different media. You probably have heard or read or seen him on TV, NPR, Wall Street Journal. So he shows up constantly. What he's doing right now, as he is talking about what to do next in life, the way he puts it, is to train new journalists who are interested in environmental communication. So that's what he's doing. He was a pioneer of journalism, environmental journalism, where he began doing this in the 1970s. When nobody was doing it, and now he claims there's lots of people doing it. Let me just teach what I learned so that we can do it right. So that's his job right now. What are his key arguments? Okay, so the first one, as I mentioned, is if we really want to address the climate challenge successfully, we have to have the right trade regime. Because there's certain things we need that we don't have. So we need to be able to have the right trade regime so we can have access to it and buy it. We need to overcome some technological frontiers, some of which we could, frontiers in the US, if we bought the technology from others, some of which we don't have the right technological answers just yet anywhere in the world, but international trade can actually help us facilitate cooperation, intellectual property theft, you name it the way you like it, but very often technology evolves that way. I have a cousin who's very involved in software, for example, and he always tells me that they really like when they reach a point where their know-how or technology is finding a limitation. They love for someone to steal their know-how. They won't sue them, so that then they can see and they can very easily, they know there's 2 or 3 companies in the world who do what they do, and they're all watching each other. So they know when they're all struggling, and when someone takes it to the next level, they can find what they copied from them that allow them to overcome their hurdle. So in a way, that's illegal. It's a violation of property law because these companies are competitors. So they didn't reach out to them to lease the technology, but they realized that they hit a wall. And there's this agreement that has never been negotiated that if we can push it another step, then you're very welcome to cheat because we're going to hit a wall somewhere, and then you take it to the next level. Granted, these are companies in friendly countries. It's a very different story if the technology is borrowed from certain countries. So that's, in a way, why a generous trade regime that would work formally or informally that way would actually facilitate finding the solutions that we need. And the last point, one of the main areas is storage. We already have enough technology and prices are becoming competitive to use solar and wind. The problem is that we harvest more than we need at some point. We need to be able to store it so that we can use it when we don't need it. And the batteries that we need for that, to power a shopping mall, the library, etc., would be gigantic and very expensive. How can we make them smaller, increase capacity, efficiency, reliability? And that is one of the big limitations that we have, which is actually a good step in the right direction. You know, having the right windmills or the solar panels at an affordable price to harvest the energy was a challenge in the past. Now it's not. They do that very well, very cheaply. The problem is that, you know, we need the energy when the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine, so we need to be able to store it. And now it's the storage capacity that is the problem. That's the big frontier. So whatever company comes up with that kind of technology, they're really gonna make billions. So really quickly now, a few pictures. What are the technologies that the author, Mr. Ward, is emphasizing here? He talks about solar. Basically, we get the energy from the sun. All energy is solar. You know, we learn from physics. But what we call solar energy is what we harvest through solar panels, where the sun gets into the panels. From there, we use different transmission technologies to get it where we need it. Another kind of technology that is solar is solar thermal. In this case, we basically direct the energy of the sun to a container of a liquid, maybe water, where it boils, it heats up, and then we take that energy where we need it. So it's very different from the other approaches, both solar, but the way we do it is different. And these pictures that I'm showing you, the real pictures from some of the biggest of their kind in the world. So I tell you where that is. Another one is wind. It's the blades. We are starting to put more of these windmills on the oceans because that's where wind is more reliable, happens for a longer time, is stronger. So here in the Great Lakes, we have a lot of potential on land, but also offshore. We haven't really begun developing offshore. These are the technologies that Mr. Ward emphasizes. These are the ones he doesn't. So nuclear is one that has split environmentalists. We have the technology to make nuclear happen fairly easily. The problem with nuclear is that an accident, nuclear plant going bad, is very different from a blade breaking. So the problem is that accidents can be really bad, and society is split on it. The environmentalists are split on it as well. Some environmentalists claim that we do have enough technology and we have storage technology to keep it safe, and nuclear doesn't generate, once the plant is operational, doesn't generate greenhouse gases. So that's the way to go. And some environmentalists said, no, it's another attack on Earth for other reasons, the waste, etc. So I'm not going to develop these very much in the sense that there is no technological frontier. I mean, there's always progress being made, but nuclear could work fairly safely and reliably if we decide to push it. The problem is that it is very expensive. And what makes it very expensive is the fact that we don't have a clear solution for storing the waste. The government passed a law decades ago. The government would take it if companies would make it. We use it, but we don't have a place to put it, which means that now, by law, they have to be stored on site. So anywhere you see a nuclear power plant, it has the waste there, and we are paying out of our own taxes to keep it there until we find that place. So that's part of what makes it expensive. What makes it more expensive is the fact that nuclear companies don't find insurance. Who's going to insure against a nuclear accident if we don't really know what the consequences will be? And that is the big problem. So there's always an ongoing debate between the government and the nuclear industry to see if the government can basically waive any kind of responsibility beyond an X amount of dollars. If an accident happens that costs $200 billion, the idea is how much of that the companies have to pay. And the companies obviously want to pay as little as possible so that the energy is as cheap as possible. But we don't have consensus of that. The government hasn't given them the green card to do this. So a couple of things that are really important that are not really well developed in the article, I think, but they're very important. First of all, the market for energy is a global market, and global markets for trade are guided by the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and GATT. In general, the argument here is basic principles: let's not discriminate against each other's products because we're all citizens of the world, so let's just give everybody the right to sell in different countries. That's basically the idea. However, those are the rules that were created when the regime was established, but the oil-producing countries were not founding members, so energy was not necessarily included in the negotiations. Normally, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is organized by subject areas. Energy doesn't have very clear rules. The result of that is that energy markets are pretty much a function of a country that has oil and a country that wants to buy it. So there's no clear open market. Normally, oil-producing countries will sell oil or gas at different prices to different countries, to different companies from different countries on the basis of market conditions up to a point, but also friendliness, geopolitical conditions. So all of that creates a very complicated market in which there's no one single price, even though there is a kind of like more or less standard price around the world. But countries, companies really do a lot of work behind closed doors to get better deals. So we don't really know exactly how much people are paying what. And that's one of the rules of the trade regime that we try to avoid. Don't do things behind closed doors. If market transactions are open, everybody's going to know what everybody's paying. So that's going to drive prices down. That's not the way it works in the energy regime. And that's one of the challenges that we have for renewable energy, green technology, because we don't have clear rules either. So this is considered to be part of the energy industry, and the rules are still up in the air. But it is important that we do this, and it is because green technology generates or keeps about 10% of the American workforce employed. Estimates by the US government suggest that 10% of Americans either work in environmental sustainability, green technology field, or have part of their job or tasks or responsibilities involve any of the above. So somebody will be hired to do 90% of whatever they get hired to do, but then 10% they have to do sustainability, which might mean lower the electricity bill. So it's about 10% of Americans as reported to the government. So many more of these jobs could be created if we moved in the direction of renewables and we actually threw political, economic, and technological resources behind. So it is a very important area of employment, which is normally either very well paid because it involves a lot of research. So it requires people with many years of schooling, which normally are only willing to work for more, or they're very labor intensive. Putting solar panels on people's roofs is much more labor intensive than running a power plant. Power plant can be run, a really big one can be run with only 20, 25 people and not even full time. So most of the time people will be watching things, but because we're developing new technology, we need solar panels in many places. That means that right now we have many years of huge potential to keep people busy putting solar panels in different places. There's going to be a point where we're going to have enough solar panels that demand for labor will flatten out and probably start to decline. But right now we're starting to see a growth in this industry. A few areas of research that are going really fast, moving in, making a lot of progress in different countries, but not necessarily in the US. This is not addressed in the reading, so I wanted to bring it up. I'm going to go through this quickly because what's interesting about renewables is that it's nothing new. These humans have been doing for thousands of years. One of them is wave power. We have lots of archaeological sites close to beaches, to shorelines, where the locals actually use the waves, the power of the waves, to power a windmill, for example, to do some things with the wave. And the same is true with tidal energy. This is a really big one in Scotland. Scotland has been very concerned about their future because since the 1970s, they've been getting lots of royalty payments from oil and gas companies from the North Sea, but those are declining because they are getting to the point that they cannot, it's not as easy to pump what's left. So they're thinking of finding ways to remain an energy society by going with renewables. So they're doing a lot of offshore wind and tidal. We also have geothermal, and in terms of geothermal, we'll see that the African countries, South Asian countries are really being pushed here. In the Americas, the US has a significant presence in geothermal, but it's very static. We have up-and-comers. Guatemala, for example, is really investing very heavily in geothermal, so it's one of the countries to watch. But we can see that Kenya and Indonesia are the main ones. So we can see by absolute amounts, production generation, the US is leading, but we can see there's a few countries there that are growing exponentially. Another one is hydroelectric, but we're not going to see a lot of development here because in the US we're actually removing dams rather than putting dams. Somebody decided this country is too dammed already, so we're going to remove those. In some countries they are damming themselves, but there's a lot of opposition, either from environmentalists because of the impact on wildlife, or from communities who need to be removed. The Three Gorges Dam, for example, in China, the largest in the world, required the removal of more than 1 million people, most of whom were not happy to be removed. Entire cities, hospitals were flooded to create the largest human-made lake in the world. But even in China, that was very costly politically, and China is moving away from that. A couple of things that we hear a lot about in the US, but doesn't seem to be going far, is carbon capture and storage. This is the idea is that let's get greenhouse gases pumped into the ground where they become solid again, and we store them there. So countries in Scandinavia have been pioneering this. Norway has been doing that for a while with some of the depleted fields under the North Sea. This one is from Iceland. There was a big push to do a similar one in Illinois, but the farmers really rose up in arms against it. That would have been close to us. It would have been a pioneering project in the US. But there's a lot of opposition because nobody wants one close. Imagine there is a leak, and then you end up, killing. That's a concern. Your cattle, people in the house. And actually, those figures seem to be confirmed by some of the older storage capture projects in Norway. One of Beloit College's alumni actually has been researching with a group of Norwegians in one of the best fields where they tried this. They decided they were going to seal the field, but they decided to seal it by trying as an experiment to pump carbon down there. They sealed it, and what they've noticed is carbon comes into contact with different chemicals, and it produces different reactions. It finds cracks as well. So the carbon is moving up through the cracks, and they're concerned that it might eventually find its way into the ocean. And after that, it will eventually be released again, probably to the atmosphere, in part because of the wildlife that it will kill under the ocean. Was that the best way to do it? It was an early project. So far, the carbon is contained there, but they have lots of red flags, in different places that they're watching. So it's a big technological challenge. So those who are technologically inclined, that there's a lot of potential there, but it's not very well developed. Another one, which is the perennial area of work, conservation. Why do we need to harvest more energy if we could probably start by keeping what we have? Let's seal our windows, let's close the windows where we don't need them, let's use insulation. So that is really one of the ways in which countries that have really reduced their emissions have moved forward. Energy conservation, energy efficiency. California has been very good in that regard since the 1970s by passing very strict legislation that mandates specific reforms. So success is here, so it is possible to do it. I still think we have a lot of long ways to go, but we can see that the EPA has documented that we have made some significant progress there. Transportation is also one area in which we seem to be watching significant changes with the development and the adoption, the mainstreaming of electric vehicles. So that's something that is happening. Always my word of caution with EVs is that don't buy an EV unless you know what powers your house. Because if you plug it and your energy is coming from coal, you're actually generating more greenhouse gas emissions by having an electric vehicle than you would if you run your traditional car powered by gasoline. So make sure that you call your utility or you go online and you find out what is your source of energy, because you can actually cause more damage, more harm than good. So something to keep in mind. But we do have a lot of potential by going with greener transportation. We will not only reduce energy use, but we can also clean up the air, and that is very important. Speaking of which, the EPA has come with a new standard for PM particulate matter, and they're recommending 9 parts per trillion. The challenge with this is that when you use science, the EPA keeps looking at the standard recommendation. It was 12 this year, they lowered it to 9, and by that standard, Milwaukee metro area is not in compliance. So this is one of the areas that was under the bar, and with the new standard, now we're not. I say we because I presume Beloit is the same story. As goes Milwaukee, goes Beloit. The difference is that you guys have data to prove it, we don't. We're just hypothesizing based on Milwaukee. Madison is very close, it's getting close. Madison, considering that it's not a major industrial city, has very polluted air. That's always something that I find surprising. I think people really like to drive there. But Milwaukee is definitely not compliant right now, and there's implications for that also. Okay, we need more research. Yes, okay. So I'm gonna go through a number of slides in a minute, quite quickly, mostly to show trends, because that's the point. So I apologize if you feel that I go very early, but very quickly. But the point is not really to read everything, but to show what we need to see. Here, what the point is that we can see that we're making progress in the right direction. So that's good news. So I wanna be upbeat. Okay. So a few things to think about while we think about ways that we can make more progress yet. So the author mentions an article, but doesn't really develop it. And this is the article that I think is useful in case you want to read it. This is a group of 3 prominent scholars from the US and Europe who are looking at the geopolitics of renewables, the geopolitics of energy. And they basically say, if we really want to get it right, we need to get it right along those lines. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of those on this slide because I'm going to break it down slide by slide, point by point in different slides. So let's start with the first one, critical material supply chain. The argument that they make here is that the development of battery storage for EVs and potentially for whatever house solar system we have is going in the direction of rare earth elements, most of which are mined and processed in China. And here is where the piece about trade is important. So if you want to have access to them, at the moment, we need to give the money to China. And China would like to give us the batteries rather than the rare earth materials so that they keep the technology there. So that's a big challenge. And what we see in the graph, and as I mentioned, there's a lot to see, but I just want to breeze through it quickly because the point is, we can see China really, really reigns supreme. So they really are big in renewables, and they know what it takes. So they're leading there. And this is another way of looking at things. This is lithium. If the technology goes in the direction of lithium, what we see here is that China is not such a big player, you would think. Because you would think the US has good relations with Australia, Argentina, Chile, and some of those others. Yes, that is true. But China has moved very quickly to sign free trade agreements with those countries to mine their lithium and send it to China. So that's a challenge. Okay. So we're looking into the future. There's a lot at stake here, and it's not just renewable. Enter the geopolitics, which is one of the goals of the piece. When you have a major disruption in an industry, some will lose, some will win. And we don't know who those will be. But the questions to ask ourselves is, is it going to be the ones with the raw materials? With oil and natural gas, the countries that are sitting on them made a lot of money. The way we're going with renewables is not so clear. China, so far, wants to have production close to the mines because the mines that have been developed are in China. So that gives them tremendous power, economic, and eventually technological and political going forward. But that doesn't have to be the case. If we want to bring those industries into the US can strike trade deals with countries to say, let's talk about what you need that we can send you, but we want to get the lithium into the US to make the batteries into the US. So that's one of the areas where the US is still a little bit hesitant. So will it be the ones with the processing the facilities? Right now it's China, which does both. But because it's a nascent industry, things can change. But first mover advantage, that's very important. Another aspect that they tell us to think about is that regardless of where the minerals are and where the processing is, there's going to be technology. So if you have the technology and you control the technology, you can say, we can only make these batteries if production is where we develop the technology. So you want the batteries, okay, and you need to bring me the minerals and I will process them here. And that's where the US is really trying to push for the technological breakthrough, which right now is really nowhere to be found. I mean, China has technology, Europe has technology, the US is, but there's no clear leader here. That's one of the battles that we're fighting. If one of them takes the lead and leaves the others behind, then they can actually change the market by saying, we're not going to sell this technology to anybody, the production must come here, and that will change the game completely. Because the finance will have to go. A lot of the finance comes from the US or Europe, but China has plenty of money too. So in terms of financing, the China-US, which is one of the arguments in the article, China does not need financial help. They already have it. If they can find the technology, the rest will follow. And what we see here is that China is basically investing a lot of money to mass produce them with the idea that they are learning by doing. The more you make, the more you realize the mistakes, the more you fix those mistakes, the more you advance the technology. So the idea is, let's just throw money at it, let's produce more and more, and eventually we'll figure out the bugs and we will be able to produce the best technology cheaply. You can see that Europe is not behind. If you really add up the countries of the European Union, you can see that they're actually trying to keep pace with China, but you can see that the US is very behind in that sense. So the US is playing catch up. And here's another graph that pretty much shows the same. We can see that the trend is up, and we can see that most of the investment is happening in, if you're not colorblind like me, you probably will see that it's renewable and electrifying transit. Is that correct? Transport. So those are the areas, and most of those are led by China. A lot of the technology is developed by China. Here's a really interesting one that I will show you. What I really want you to see here is that in the last few years, there is more investment in renewable energy than in dirty energy. So financially, the tide has turned. The financial industry is saying, the future, the money is to be made in renewables, and that's the direction that we're going. So we can see that renewables are moving, taking the lead, at least as far as the financial sector goes. This is a similar case for solar. We can see that in solar, China is by far the leader. The next one will show us that there is a lot of growth, but this is how far we need to go if we are going to meet the obligations of the Paris Climate Agreement. So we can see significant increases. Are we going to make it? To be honest, I think it's possible, because every year we're setting new records in the world for investments in solar. From a climate perspective, if the problem is to fix the climate problem, it doesn't really matter if we put the solar panels on our houses here. If China does it, that really helps us. The issue that matters for China is that it's the technology that comes with it. Because if I get the technology, I alone cannot solve the problem. So some others will have to put solar panels and they'll have to buy it from me. So that is the idea. So if we really skip this technology altogether and other countries do it, we might be able to still save the planet and we will benefit from it, but we'll miss an opportunity to jump on a very profitable industry that is coming. Similar is the case for wind. So big challenge. Solar is about to just skyrocket. I think wind is leveling off a little bit. It's growing, but not as fast. People prefer solar. There's lots of reasons why states prefer incentives for solar. Solar gives you more flexibility. You can't plant one of those gigantic blades on your front yard. Your neighbors probably won't like it. Your city won't allow it. But putting solar panels is a different story. So you can scale it differently. And we can see, again, the direction this is going. Who's doing this when it comes to renewable capacity? Again, we see China. Another graph that will show us more or less the same. Where are we investing in energy transition? By energy transition, we don't mean just the harvesting technology, but the grid, to take the energy from where we collect it to where we need it. So it's a number of things that go in it. But the point that I'm trying to make is that all of the graphs, all of the data suggests that China is leading across the board. They're really, really behind this. One thing that I didn't mention is important. One of the main reasons why China, one of the main reasons, not the only one, why China decided to push this is because of the suppression of political freedom in China. But when the air in the cities became unbreathable, because China was building coal-fired power plants around the cities, and then in the winter and in the summer when there were full capacity, the air was so polluted that people went to the hospital, people started to complain, and that was not a political thing. So people started to get to the streets to complain about this, and then while we're complaining and demonstrating, we might as well demonstrate against political authoritarianism. So the government said, oh my goodness, we can't allow this, because we tell people, be free to express their concerns, but then when they do, oh my God, they're expressing their concerns, and they have plenty. So if we clean up the air, we give them one less reason to take to the streets. And this is one important aspect to think about. So will the world of renewables look a little bit like that of big oil? Are we going to have pipelines across the world? Or is it going to be small scale? We don't know. But there's big projects coming out of China, Europe, to actually develop massive scale projects. So in Europe, the idea is the sun shines the best in the Sahara. Why don't we just harvest it there? and then take the energy to Europe. That's one of the plans. This is all future projections. In China is, what if we connect all of the countries around us to China, to the grid, and then if we don't like them, we get in trouble with them, we just turn off the lights, and good luck to them. So that is one of the concerns we have here. These are projects that it's not clear they're going to happen, but the European Union is pushing, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for technology to create a European network of renewables, which has actually been incredibly helpful. It's very poorly developed, but when the European Union decided to stop buying Russian gas, it allowed them to help Germany, Italy, and the countries that rely more on Russian gas by changing the direction of energy. Some of that energy that came from Russia to Germany continue on to the West. And when that didn't happen, then France said, well, I've got lots of nuclear, so I'm going to send it your way. And then Spain, Portugal, Italy had lots of renewables, so it made more sense to sell renewable energy in southern France while France was powering Germany. So the Europe says, okay, we can do this. We've proven it to ourselves that we did it, but it didn't have to be this hard. So let's just have a clear system where we connect all of Europe, and when the sun shines in southern Europe, we keep the north warm. When the wind blows in Scotland or the waves, then we can power the continent. So that's in the works. The European one is going to happen. Whether it involves North Africa or not, I don't know. The one with China, there's a lot of skepticism among China's neighbors. But there is also plans in the Midwest. And one of the things about going with renewables in the Midwest is that it could completely change the energy market in the US. Right now, when we think of energy, we think Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. But if we go with renewables, we have more here, more potential. The sun shines here. I believe Beloit has more hours of sunshine than Miami. I don't know if this is true, but that's what they told me when they hired me. So I never actually, now that I think about it, never did the fact finding about this. But it certainly is a lot sunnier here than the place where I grew up. So there's some truth to that. And the sun shines in the winter too. And the wind, is here as well. So there is peaks and there is lows as well, but there is a lot of potential. So if we develop the potential that we have with the technology that we have, by 2050, the map of the US as far as technology goes for renewables, for energy, could look very different. You can see that Texas is holding on, but you can see that anywhere between Minnesota to the north to Indiana to the east and into Tennessee to the west, to the south, the heart of the continent really becomes the electric power of the US. And then we're going to have more than we need. So for us to really capitalize on the potential of solar and wind in the Midwest, we'll need a national grid. We need to have the way to take it out. Right now, the federal government facilitates the transfer of energy across states. Wisconsin, along with Illinois, Minnesota, other states, have a compact and agreement that when energy supply is challenged in a place, other states will come to the rescue. Texas is the only one who didn't do this. So there is one in the west, southeast, northeast. Texas decided, I don't want to comply with federal regulations, so I'm not going to do this. And what happened in Texas a few years ago, when the energy system froze, nobody came to the rescue. They were not connected in the ways, they sent energy out, but they said, well, we can't take it in. So that's a big challenge. I don't know if Texas will change their mind about this, but certainly in the US, there's a regional agreement to have states help one another. That could be the basis for new regulation on trade for energy across the US. Certainly in the Midwest, the potential is greater than what we need, so we can really power the country from here. So all of that could lead to reduce of demand for fossil fuels. And one of the arguments by the scholars is, what if that causes the collapse of Scotland and the UK doesn't come to the rescue? Will they break away? But if they do, it'll probably be a very sweet breakaway. There'll be some whiskey involved after hours. But what if it is South Sudan that falls apart? What if Saudi Arabia? What if Iran? I bet there's going to be a lot more involved, and that's the question mark they raise. There's some societies that are held together by their despotic rulers. But if people take to the streets because the economy collapses, those countries could fall apart. There could be civil wars, there'll be refugees, there'll be displacement. So the implications can be devastating. So creating a system that is global to facilitate transitions so that the transition is gradual and allows for countries to adjust. Those who are going to stop exporting or whose exports will fall have to be able to find alternatives. So that is the idea, because change, when it's slow, you can adjust to and you can make changes. But if we look at the trends, this is a little bit skewed by the fact that it includes the 1970s when the oil embargo happened. But what we see here is for the United Arab Emirates and for Saudi Arabia, we can see that the share of revenue coming from the exportation of fossil fuels is either steady or declining. So as we are finding more deposits in other parts of the world, fracking has been very successful in the US, but at the same time, there is this, that many countries are really going big on renewables. So some countries are almost self-sufficient in the sense that they don't need to import a lot of energy. So some of them are very small, so they really not make a big difference in the world, other than symbolically and to themselves, such as those at the top. But look at Germany, look at Brazil. Those are gigantic countries. Brazil is a country of continental proportions. Only 20% of the energy is dirty. Imagine if Brazil can do it. Brazil, granted, has developed technologies in many industries that the US would wish to have. And it also has, for example, in ethanol, Brazil has been powering their cars with ethanol since the 1970s. When Brazil didn't have any oil, the oil embargo happened, Brazil sided with the good people, with the US and Europe, and then they got punished as well. Well, then you're not gonna get my oil. So Brazilian engineers, Brazil has very good universities, very good technologies, starting to come up with ways to feed their cars sugar. And that's what powers the cars in Brazil. Well, actually, it's not entirely true, because they do that and they do gasoline as well. But the Brazilians could pretty much put sugar in the coffee if they want, and also in the cars. And Brazil has a very powerful ethanol industry, and they said, we can really power American cars. But Iowa said, no way, because we have corn here. We're going to make it out of corn, which does not have as much energy as the equivalent amount of sugar, and only survives thanks to very, very, very healthy subsidies. And the production of ethanol requires a lot of energy that is normally coming from oil. So we're actually trying to develop an industry that is causing more harm than good, unless you're an Iowa farmer, and a few in Wisconsin as well. So this is one of the problems that we have. Democracies are not perfect, but if you really run on a campaign to remove the subsidies on ethanol, I bet you're probably not going to win Iowa. Maybe not even Wisconsin, maybe Illinois. So we're basically subsidizing industries that are really not getting us to go in the right direction. Oh, and by the way, Saudi Arabia has no interest in this business, as you can see there, 0.2% renewables. They said the world is not going to change, people are addicted to oil. So I'm going to sit and watch this. That's their plan. Okay. Another aspect to think about is what happens if we actually avoid the more catastrophic predictions of climate change. Think about all the troubles that we save ourselves. For example, Africa is the leader in the world in the use of renewables as a share of energy use. So in absolute numbers, they're not the leaders, but in relative numbers, they're doing very well. Look at Brazil there with their sugar, their sweet energy. Having said that, we still have about 1 billion people who do not have access to energy, and many of them are in Africa. So Africa is really pushing renewables. That's why I mentioned that Kenya in particular is really going the direction of geothermal. There is a fault line that goes through the eastern part of Africa that divides Africa, because Africa is being torn apart, and there's lots of heat that comes from there. And what Kenya does is they just trap it, and they take it to where it's needed. It powers the dynamo, and they don't need to harvest the sun, which they have plenty, or wind, because it's already right there. And that's the direction that they're going. So one of the reasons why we want people connected is because having access to energy is critical for people's chances in life. If you don't have electricity, kids cannot do homework after hours. And in many places where people are poor, they help with cattle. They help raise the little babies. They help doing all kinds of things in the house, so they don't have time for homework. So by the time their parents are tired and ready to go to bed, is when they do the homework. But if the lights are not out, they can't do well at school, and that sets them back. So the poorest of the poor really need to be connected. There's been a number of projects to bring solar to countries, but we need to scale it up. And the potential is there. So this is the percentage of the population that don't have access to reliable electricity, but Africa does have a lot of potential from solar in particular. We can see that they're number one. Does it matter that Africa does this? It matters because Africa could be the first continent that pretty much skips the oil age. Africa can adopt renewables before they became heavy investors in oil or natural gas. They've done some hydro, they've done other things, they've done a little bit of coal, but they can skip all of the damage of those industries and going straight into renewables, so they can really, really skip centuries of development in technology. But we can see that Africa, from a climate perspective, doesn't really make a difference. So the difference is, if all the energy they're going to produce now is from renewables, their share is not going to increase. But where the work needs to be done is in Asia. So those are the countries where we want to develop renewables. And this goes back to the comment that I made earlier. The article says US versus China. Well, we want China to succeed. Because if China doesn't get it right, we're not going to be able to fix the climate problem here. We want India to get it right. We want Saudi Arabia to get it right. So we have a lot of countries here who are some of the top emitters of climate who are not friends of the US. And yet, we cannot address climate change if we don't help them out. And that is what we see in international relations. Sometimes we can disagree on value, but we can find common agreement on interest. We can agree that we don't like each other for a number of reasons, but we need to work together because we're together in this. So the plane is crashing. Somebody forgot to close the door. So let's just fight it out when we land, but let's make sure that we land in the first place. So that's where we're at. So that was probably not a funny joke, because I learned that last week another plane lost a door. So it seems like it's standard now. So is that the new AC system? So I have a student who's actually graduating, and she's going to, this week we were discussing climate change. Actually, it was not even my class. My colleague couldn't go to class, so I did. And they were discussing climate change. So I said, okay, so that's good. And one of my students who I hadn't had in class in a long time got an internship with the Federal Aviation Administration. And she impressed them so much last year that said, if you come back, you can get a job. And then she basically said that she's a little skeptical about climate. And I cracked a joke that everybody laughed, but I don't think she did, which is, okay, so your job is to keep us alive until the plane lands so that we can all die from the emissions, right? And everybody's like, haha, how funny. And she's like, no, I don't like this business. So, okay, that was a mental break. Okay, more evidence that we do need to work with China. More evidence yet. We need to work with China. And actually, even though China is a major emitter, China is a lot more efficient with their emissions than the US is, as you can see here. Okay, so what do we need to do? Okay, we need to work with China, so we know that. So to make sure that the world stays within 2 degrees centigrade, so we're now assuming, based on the commitments from countries, that we're not going to be able to keep the planet as cool as it was in 1750, which is the beginning of the industrial era, which is taken to be the baseline. That's ideally what we want to go to. Based on the commitments from countries, we're looking at 2 degrees warmer than that. 2 degrees warmer across the board, which means that in the colder parts of the country, the winters are going to be many degrees warmer. And that might be what we see now. And in the very hot parts of the world, the summers will be many degrees warmer. So those are where the 2 extremes are. We're going to see less cold winters in the far north and far south, and scorching hot summers in the warmer parts of the earth, such as the Sahara. And the Earth try to thermoregulate when there's a lot of heat in the Sahara, it's going to have to go somewhere. It's going to go up into Europe or south. So that's why in England right now, they're getting heat waves of more than 100 degrees, which is not what England was prepared for. They don't have AC in England. Imagine if you have respiratory problems in England and you get one of those heat waves that comes out of nowhere. You go from 65, which is balmy July, to 105, which they've been having regularly the last few years. That is terrible for people. And we are expecting to see that here as well. In Canada, a few years ago, they reached 45 degrees Celsius. They go by Celsius there, which is 110, somewhere around there. So in Canada. So this is the big challenge, the extremes that we see. The US is making these pledges. China, they're making theirs, as is India, and Brazil, and Russia, and the European Union. So we do have some plans. So if you can agree that we have to work together to address the climate problem, how do we address the technological challenge that it's best to bring together the most brilliant minds of the world, wherever they might be? So this is the big challenge, because China is pumping billions into this. What if scientists from the US, from Europe, some of those scientists from Brazil, could work with Chinese scientists who are willing to put money where Americans or Europeans are not, help them develop the technology, and then share it. So this is one of the big challenges that we're facing today. We could make more progress faster, but it would require that we park our politics to be able to focus on cooperation. So the good news, we understand the dangers of global warming. Pretty much every country in the world agrees this is a real problem. Let's fix it. Okay, so we need to do it now, and we actually know what we need to do. But we know that it will cost money, because some people will lose their jobs. There's some industries that will have to go. So those are what we call losers in economics, and losers don't like to lose, so they will try to use their politics to hold on to power. And that will come at a political cost. What politician is going to run for office by saying, 50,000 of you will lose your job? You don't get elected that way. So think about Joe Manchin. He is from West Virginia, one of the worst offenders from a climate perspective, greatest emissions, but it's a state that has been what it is thanks to coal. So you can't really run on a platform and get elected in West Virginia by saying, all of you are going to go out of existence. By the way, I'm running for office. And if you vote for me, I'll guarantee we go as fast as possible. So that is the problem with the politics. You can't sell that. So good luck if you're a politician in Kentucky or West Virginia, some of the states that rely the most on coal, which is on the way out. And even oil and gas, Texas actually is very innovative, so they're really moving away. They know that changes are coming. They're trying to play different games at the same time. But the costs are huge, political and economic as well. We need an engineering revolution. So if you are pursuing a degree, I have kids that are pursuing a degree in engineering or considering, push them in that direction, because there's going to be billions of dollars going there. As a colleague of mine likes to say, if you go into the right industry, even if you're really bad at it, somebody will have to hire you. So that's what we're looking at right now. So considering how much money countries are pledging to invest in this, even the bad ones will get a job. But I really believe in human ingenuity. When given a chance, and when people mature enough, I see this from my students, even a B- student can achieve an A. So in that sense, I worry less than my colleague does, and there's a lot to be said about learning on the job. So I really think that if the money comes, people's minds will eventually wake up. Big changes have to happen. The pledges that countries are making suggest that if change has to happen, it's got to be in the next 25 years. So we're really looking at the generation of kids who are in high school right now. Those are the ones that have to help us get there. And those of us who are a little ahead of them have to steer them in the right direction. So if you're really smart, get into this industry, you can make a difference. If you're not very smart, well, maybe you want to get into this as well. So really, get your kids and your neighbors' kids to get into engineering if possible, the right kind. Okay, so there is going to be a significant change in the world. What we call the energy transition is happening. I gave a presentation here a few years ago, and one of the takeaways is happening now. It is gaining momentum. Can't stop it. It's best to ride it. So get ready for it. At this point, we're not really pioneers. If we get into renewables, it's becoming very mainstream. But it will change the world. It will have an impact in this country as well, because some parts of the country that rely on fossil fuels will probably see significant changes. So, this also means that many things can change. As we move into renewables, we have big decisions to make, and we can actually steer things in different directions. Renewables can be done small scale. When countries decided to go with fossil fuels, the federal government in the early 20th century passed a mandate that required every American household to be connected to a power plant in the interest of justice. Most areas in the rural US were powered by wind. So wind was really prominent in the late 19th, early 20th century. But the concern in Washington was that those people would be left behind because we started to see the potential of coal and the potential of oil, the potential of natural gas. So if people in the rural areas power their lives with wind, which doesn't do a very good job, was the assumption at the time, and people in the cities go with these gigantic power plants, the rural areas will be left behind. And that's not fair. So the government passed a law that every American who wanted to be connected to the grid should, and had to be connected, and that the grid had to be powered by, one of the following. So pretty much it was a fossil fuel. So when we went in that direction, the US invested billions of dollars to develop a grid and a network of dirty power plants, which we now know came at a cost. So when you make investments by the billions, you don't want to continue to make those investments into the future. At some point, you want to sit down and start, realizing your savings. So in what direction we go with renewables is being decided right now. Are we going to go with gigantic solar farms that will be run by we energies, and then we just continue to pay the bill? Or are we going in the direction of small, rooftop solar? That's exactly what's being decided right now. So I really encourage you to think about these things while you go to vote. When you talk to your neighbors, community solar is an option. We Energies, Alliant in Beloit offer renewables much more cheaply because they have the scale than community solar. But community solar gives you power and control. So those are the challenges that we're really discussing right now. If we need to move fast, maybe the government will come up with a mandate and decide to steer the future of renewables in one direction or the other. But at the moment, we're all still trying to find the door to put it back on and keep flying, but nobody knows where it is. So when we find it, somebody will say, we're going to land in Green Bay, for example. So if you want the plane to go to the Twin Cities, this is your chance. Okay. So international cooperation, as I mentioned, will remain necessary. The technology that we have today, solar or wind, is not developed by one scientist, by one company, or by one country. We've had renewables for thousands of years. What we have now is a massive scale that makes it competitive with fossil fuels. And what made it affordable and mass scale was a mandate that was developed in California in the 1970s, 1980s, that required that Californians spend X amount of money on renewables. Or Iowa in 1981. Iowa was actually the first state to do this, that Iowa needed to go into renewables. So it was thanks to the legislature of Iowa, in a way that showed us the way, in California, that allowed us to get started. And then later in the 1980s, less funding went into renewables, but at that point, American technology was taken by Germans, who really took it to the next level. So then the Europeans developed the lead in solar and wind, until China then became interested. So then China took the technology, this is a story about my cousin, took the technology from the Germans and the Americans, whatever they had, and they made it accessible to all. They made it cheaper, they improved a few things, and now the challenge is that everyone has to embrace it. How much of that technology improved by the Chinese is the boomerang effect. It's coming back to the US. It's time for the US to take it to the next level. But it has been a global effort. And if the trade regime is not open enough to allow for that kind of cooperation, whether it's intended and formal or cheat behind my back because I hit the wall and I don't know how to take it from here. So what kind of cooperation? It's always easier if it's formal, if there is treaties to protect copyright laws. If the ideas come out of China, maybe we should pay the Chinese. But if we perfect it here, the Chinese should work with us. That's the kind of challenge that the law right now doesn't specify. So international cooperation is critical, and international trade has to facilitate that. And if we don't do it, we're probably not going to get there as fast as we possibly could. So we need a trade regime that has very clear laws and legislation for trade in technology, transfers of energy, so that if I don't have energy, I can buy it freely from other countries. If I need the resources to develop the infrastructure, I can have the finance from the countries that have it. The know-how, the brains, the scientists. So all of that, we have to have a trade regime that will facilitate that kind of cooperation. It's not easy, not only because we don't have a good trade regime, but also because of legislation. In some countries, the sources of energy belong to the people, and the state represents the people. So it's not run by private companies. Even in the US, utilities are not clearly private or public because there's no free market for trade, for energy. So the companies get a monopoly, pretty much, and they negotiate the price with the government. So even that is not a free market. There's reasons why we did it that way: universal access, safety, etc. So those are things that have to be worked out, and it won't be easy because one country will want states to control the industries, and some countries will say, well, no, I can't allow you to do that because in my country, it's the private sector that does this. So how do we come up with the rules to make sure that everyone gets what they want? Another thing that's important is that, when we export cars, it's very easy for countries to say, well, no, I don't like your car, so I'm going to pass a ban on cars from your country. So what about energy? Energy is energy. But what if a country has a dispute with another one? We develop an international network, and then, what I mentioned earlier, one country says, well, I'm going to turn off the lights. Tough luck. So we need to have a regime that will not allow that, because countries are not going to cooperate if one has the power to basically take the power to take the power away from other. So how do we create the rules and the enforcement mechanism? That's another one. We can have the rules, but what happens when there is violators? International trade regime is based on voluntary compliance. I'm not going to invade you if you all of a sudden decide not to import my cheese. But I won't be happy because we have a rule that you export your cheese to me and I export my cheese to you. And if you ban my cheese, I won't be happy, but I can't invade you. So that's why we have the World Trade Regime, and the World Trade Regime has a mechanism to allow us to get past that. We need to have something similar for energy, but we're not quite there yet. But there's a lot of homework to be done. We need engineers, but also we need lawyers, we need financiers willing to take the risk. We have a lot of work to do, and everyone has to do it. So with that, it'd be very interesting to come back in 10 years and see how much of this happens, what direction it went. The challenge really is that we don't know. There's so many factors, but these are the kinds of things that I think we need to think about, because these are the changes that are coming. I cannot predict the future. I'm just a social scientist, but we try to hypothesize based on where we are in the present, and that's what I did. So I hope that stimulated your interest in the topic. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to you for your comments, questions, concerns, etc. Okay, so I think we're grown up, so we can just take care of ourselves, right? So you can decide who goes. Normally the boss moderates.
Okay, I was just turning that down so we didn't have the same issue.
Okay. So I think there is 2 hands back there. So
okay.
They were about to get into a fist fight because they both wanted the floor, and that's when you came up.
The slide that you showed with this huge solar panel field, that field powered how much of a city, a state, a country?
Or no, not a country. So I think you're either referring to the one from the Mojave Desert or the one from Pakistan. Those are probably capable of powering a mid-sized city. Yeah, I say probably because I forgot exactly what it is. But that really depends. A city in Pakistan does not need as much energy as a city in the US. So how many homes depends on how much energy we use. And one of the things we know is that in the US you use more energy than other countries. So the same size farm is going to power more people in most of the world than here, because we're very wasteful here. Yes. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about scale. That's why, we all want to go with renewables, but the scale at which we do it varies from society to society. So if we reduce energy use here, we have to harvest less. But because Americans are very wasteful, we need to harvest more, and that's part of the challenge.
Are you familiar with the movie documentary, The Dimming?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
That is a very interesting documentary movie, and it's free to watch. It's called The Dimming, D-I-M-M-I-N-G, and it's a full-length climate engineering movie. And it just gives a perspective, and it's kind of a head scratcher to maybe enlighten the subject a little bit. It's called The Dimming.
Yeah, geoengineering is something I didn't touch on. There's some really interesting geoengineering projects. Some of them are gaining some traction. We're looking for a financier to develop it. So some of those involve reflecting the sunshine back into space. So there is a project that would bring these solar-powered paddles that you release into the ocean by the thousands, and they will, produce foam that will naturally reflect the sun back into space. So that's one of them. That's what we're talking about geoengineering solutions. You're really not stopping burning fossil fuels, but because you know that you continue to have a stronger greenhouse gas effect, so what you do is you address the problem by deflecting heat back into space. So you minimize how much of the sun we get, and we keep the heat that we are producing here. Another project is to create a gigantic mirror that we're going to install out into space that will reflect the sun back out there. So that would be incredibly costly, more than the little ducklings, moving the waters of the ocean. The idea of the mirror, I don't know, Russia just said that they might put nuclear weapons in space, so that might shoot down the mirror. So it becomes very risky to go with that. But we have lots of geoengineering solutions. Another one is if we look at the geological record, we see that the colder years tend to coincide with a massive volcanic eruption. We have the one that was caused by Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines in 1991. When some of these gigantic explosions happen, there is so much release into the atmosphere that for the next 12 to 15 months, that is exactly what we are talking about. It reflects the sun back into space. So those tend to be low years. When we look at the mini ice age in medieval Europe, what scientists are discovering is that they coincide with what the geological record suggests was a cataclysmic volcanic eruption in Indonesia or somewhere else in the world that were so powerful and so gigantic that they basically blinded the sun, causing 5 years of winter at that point in the colder parts of the world. They would have been North America, and it was certainly Europe. And if you look back at Europe, those are the years where there was famine, people were dying on the streets. The harvests in the summer were poor because it was never warm enough or sunny enough. So we seem to see that was because of geoengineering. Geoengineering works. You can really keep the heat out. But once you choose to do that, it's very hard to change that. So, and geoengineering projects in general are very expensive. We don't have the technology to provoke volcanic eruptions, but that would be the simplest of all. If you can just get one big volcano that is about to erupt, it's just like, go now. So, that would really take care of the problem. But then, who would like to deal with the lava and everything else? So that's why, most scientists who do climate, they recommend that probably the best thing to do is use less fossil fuels and use the technology that we're already developing. But certainly geoengineering is getting a lot of traction.
You know, it's really interesting with the geoengineering and a lot of talk about the some of the particles that are being dispersed into the upper atmosphere, and that also reflects the heat downward, which warms the planet. So you can have a reflection of the sun back into space toward the sun. However, also the flip side of that is that it reflects the heat back down to the earth, which is supposedly causing a thermal increase in temperatures along with weather modification. Is geoengineering also on the same scientific advances as weather modification?
Well, geoengineering is actually very simple. It's just put a mirror and reflect the sun back. It's that simple. We just don't have the money to do it. It's very expensive. It's very, very simple. Weather modification is way more complicated, but it's cheaper. But we just don't do it well. But the geoengineering thing is very simple. Get the entire population of the world to go to the beach in the summer one day and splash the water. That's what we're talking about, and keep doing it forever. So if you can find a mechanism, it's that simple, really, it's that simple. The problem is, where exactly we're gonna do that and who's gonna pay for it? And this is what we call the free rider problem. Anybody who fixes climate for themselves fixes it for the rest of the world. So if the Chinese put the mirror there, yeah, great, go for it. Because then you solve my problem.
That's why that movie, The Dimming, is so interesting, because it has a lot of things that I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined. And it's worth the 2 hours that you have to go and view it. And
I'll check it out.
Yeah, The Dimming.
Yes.
Anybody?
I saw a program one time on the History Channel or Discovery, and they had a situation about Nikola Tesla. He was developing some type of source of electricity or energy right from the earth itself without doing anything, creating any dirty energy. That was somehow, he had these towers that he was playing with and trying to develop some kind of energy from the earth itself. You ever hear anything about that?
No, Tesla was very, very creative, without a doubt. So I don't know. I took classes in engineering school when I was in college, but I decided not to really specialize in this because I found that engineers were very boring. They're more interested in a little bolt than the entire thing, and I just could not deal with them. But that was a failing of mine. I should have been more understanding, because I'm telling you now, if we need people to go into engineering, I just would bore myself senseless. So I don't know that, but I do know, for example, that we did have bus systems in different parts of the world about 120 years ago that were basically powered by electricity. We decided to move in the direction of fossil fuels because we thought, because we did a better job powering them faster, longer, cheaply through fossil fuels. And that's what killed electricity. So that's why I was mentioning that most of these new technologies are new, but their concepts are old. They've been around for a long time. The whole idea of geoengineering makes me remember this village in the Italian Alps. There's a village in the Italian Alps, which is the opposite, but it's geoengineering as well. After World War II, the young people left. So the people who stayed became old, and they got very depressed in the long winters there. Because of the location deep in the valley, they could not see the sun for months. I think between November and March, they couldn't. So some of their grandchildren decided to just buy the biggest mirror they could find somewhere in Italy and mounted it, on the south end of the mountain and deflected it to the central square in that village.
Library patrons, the time is 7:45. We do close at 8 o'clock this evening. We ask that you make your final selection and make your way to the checkout desk at this time.
I'd like to respect police and announcement. But they did that, and apparently that really had a significant impact in terms of the the winter blues. So it became a place where the community came out to hang out over coffee and have a conversation. So it's very successful. It's similar to the principle of geoengineering. So Italian grandpas know how to do this.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor. I'm sorry I couldn't follow everything and memorize it all. Out of
I wasn't expecting that.
everything that you've presented so far, could you maybe highlight a top 2 or so that might be high correlation of coming to fruition so that when we go home we can possibly follow these green endeavors?
Yes, actually, so there's a couple of things that we can really start working on today. So is the energy savings. To what extent can we think of our house? So in the world of sustainable infrastructure, we're moving away from the age of in modernist planning. I mean, backtrack to the 19th century. There's a group of planners that were planning cities. Chicago was big because it burned. So it was like, oh my goodness, a planner's dream. We can start from scratch. So the idea is that planning a city is like we need to mimic nature. A city is like a human body. The heart is the heart and does what the heart does. The lungs are the lungs and they do what they do. So when planning the city, we have to follow that pattern. We need to put the residential part of town somewhere. We need to put the political side of town, courts, etc., somewhere. We need to put the shopping malls somewhere. We need to put jobs somewhere. So that was the thinking. So if we plan the city that way, the city, like the body, will work very well because each part of the city will specialize. That was the invention of congestion. Because then people had to spend all day going from home to work, to shop, to etc., etc. So now we're moving away from that approach, the idea that yes, you can do shopping better in the mall than anywhere else, but you get into the mall, it's an ordeal, and we hate each other in society because you're next to me, and I'm not even at the red light, and it's gonna turn green, and then red, and then green, and then red, and then maybe I'll go. So we're moving in the direction that everything has to do as much as possible of everything. So we can't think of a house as a place where people live. Let's think about a house as a charging station, as a shelter against extreme weather, but also as a battery, as a storage facility. So this is one of the basic things that we all can do. If you're lucky enough, like me, who live in Beloit, Beloit has very low crime rates, so I leave my windows open all the time when the temperature outside is comfortable, and then I close them when it's not. So that minimizes, I don't have to use AC at all in my house. I open the windows at night, the house cools down, there's only a few heat waves where the temperature only drops to 69, 70, but most days it goes down into the 50s. So I open the windows, when I get up in the morning it's chilly, I close, then it's 95 outside, but the temperature in my house remains in the low 70s. So that's a storage facility. It's not just my house, but I'm storing energy. And in the spring I start to do the same thing. When I leave for work in the morning, if the temperature is expected to rise to a temperature that is comfortable, I leave my windows open, which also has advantages because I very often forget my keys. So then I don't have to break into my house. So, and even my neighbors know that I do this. So sometimes when I come from home, I find food on my counter because neighbors have excess food and I don't know what to do with it. So that's something we can all do. Think about your house as a storage facility. Store cool air of the night in your house in the summer if you can afford it. Again, Beloit is a very safe place in general, so I can do this, and nobody has ever broken in except for thieves that leave the house better than they find it. So I'm okay with that. And another thing is, look into the future trends that I'm talking about, solar, renewables, because that's really coming. If you want to be a pioneer, early adopter, and put your own on your house, on your roof, do that. Or work with your utility. Utilities normally have plans to do it for you. That is a lot cheaper. Yeah, my students want to be revolutionized. They will not do anything with the big company because big companies are big companies and they're evil. So even if they do it cheaply, bad. But if you really want to make the biggest difference right now, work with your utility and they probably have a plan to sign you up for renewables for a fee. In Beloit is $2.50. Per month. I pay that and all of my energy comes from renewables. as opposed to me getting solar panels on my roof, it will cost me, depending on the market, $20,000, $25,000.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.